Now, if any of you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer anything that you're interested in, if I'm able to. Got anything on your mind? Got something on the brain? Well, you're in the midst of this whole mess.
Could you tell us anything about any of the court cases that you have to go through?
Oh, yes, of course they were going to have, you see, we went in with Soviet Russia, you know, and they were going to make it out that you had to be a Nazi if you were an anti-communist. And she'll never forget when that trial opened. We had first 3 indictments. I was in the first one, never came to trial at all, and the second one we licked to a frazzle with 1 week in Washington under Judge Atkins. The third one, they were going to make a long parade of it, and they took men like, he wrote the Tainted Context, Colonel Sanctuary. He's a Bible scholar and teacher and a patriot and all. Then they had some little Nazis that I'd never known or heard of, and I mean, they hadn't done anything wrong, but they were going to try to put the Nazi flavor into it, don't you see, and then make 30 people all a bunch of criminals and throw them into jail for 10 years and $10,000 fine. And when I first went there, I went with my husband, an attorney, and there was a gentleman with a scarf around his neck, and he was standing outside the little courtroom. It was Father Staskowitz. Bless his heart. And as it went on, I tell you, I had my secret weapon. They appointed the lawyers, you see, because most of them didn't have the money to hire a lawyer. Only 2 had paid lawyers. And every lawyer that got up, I'd say, he hath put down the mighty from their seats and exalted them of low degree. Be with us in this courtroom, Lord, for this is not our case. This is the cause of liberty for all Americans. Help this man, put words in his mouth. I prayed for every man that got up. And you know there were others that prayed for them too. And you know those men became rather inspired. And the jury is the funniest thing. They were picked supposedly to just bums rush us down the road to the penitentiary, you know. And they became so taken by the fact that there wasn't any evidence against anybody, that when my daughter would come to the court and my son was in the army uniform, he'd come, they'd say, "Well, it's nice to see you back. How are you?" This was the jury. And then I found the 10 that were in prison that couldn't pay their fine. You had to have bail, you see, a bond to stay out of jail. I never went to jail because I, thank God, was able to raise the $500 and stay out. Well, I found that one poor guy stood up with a piece of spoiled sausage, all white, just white with spoilage, and a dry piece of bread, and he said, "Your Honor, this is my lunch this noon. This is what they give us, and if I eat it, I throw up." And when I looked how thin and pale, and the other thing they did to help us was they took the picture of these prisoners they brought over in handcuffs getting out of the I'm describing my trial in Washington. So they took the pictures of them looking like wretches. They wouldn't let them shave. And they had one little woman who was in the thing. She says, "I'm wearing my nightie to court." They wouldn't let me dress. She had a coat over it. And they tried to make them look like a wretched bunch of bums, you see. And then in every motion picture house in Washington, they showed this picture of these unshaven, bummy-looking people. Well, any man's bummy-looking if he isn't allowed to clean himself up at all, you know. Well, I made up my mind that was a crime to have spoiled sausage. So I began, if I were sitting next to you or back of you, I'd say, there was a prisoner's roll, the 10 up in front. I'd say, "Push these up under the seats to the prisoners." And I'd get them candy bars and peanuts and stuff like that, and I'd push and you'd push, and finally they'd get up there. Well, by and by the bailiffs became friendly. They saw there was nothing wrong. When I first went there, the day that Father Staskowitz was there, this man sat out there and I says, "This is a big Nazi trial." I said, "Don't you think it? I'm not a Nazi. I'm not for Nazism." I said, "This is nothing of the kind." Well, when they all became convinced of it, Well, they finally fixed the dining room up downstairs, the bailiffs did. We called it, in the bullpen they called it. And every day I used to go over, and I'd go in before the court started in the morning with the bread and cheese and cold meat and stuff that were cold, you know. You can't cook when you're in court. And hand that in. And then at noon I'd go over and get a great big box of pie and ice cream and hot coffee from the restaurant where we all ate. And it defied every law of any kind of court case. You're not supposed the jury to say anything to the defendants, you know, and the lawyers aren't supposed to say anything to the jury. We're here to sit two lawyers and a couple of defendants and everything else, and one of the jurors maybe would help me with my box of pie and ice cream and go over there. And I'd go down to the basement part, and they'd open the door, and the prisoners would say, "Hi," like this, you know, and then I'd give it to the bailiff, and then he'd hand them in the food. Well, they began to fatten up, and I felt like Mama when the babies are, you know, looking pretty perky and got pink bows on them and everything. They say, "My, the prisoners are looking so much better." The poor devils they were meaning to starve them to death. That's what they meant to do. And I used to send them home for the weekend. The bailiffs got kind of easy on them. I mean, knowing that there was nothing against any of them. I'd send them home with all kinds of stuff that they could smuggle in a briefcase, you see, to eat over the Saturday and Sunday. And they plumped up. And after we had the final hearing and had the whole thing dismissed, I saw some of these former prisoners, and I said, "Oh, I didn't know you boys were going to be here. What is it you want?" They said, "We want you," meaning as the errand girl would go get. I'd say, "What do you want at recess?" "Well, I need some shaving things, and I haven't got a pen. I haven't any paper. And what would you like?" Well, they wanted some Spanish books. I remember I spent $16 on Spanish books for them. Then I got them a fleece-lined slippers for the cold jail floors, you know. They gave them, now for instance, a man who'd been a writer all his life, like little Vierick. They gave him a cell with no window and no light in it, so he couldn't possibly read anything, and kept them in solitary confinement, where the murderers and the pickpockets and the thieves were allowed out in the sunshine. I've got a picture in my table drawer, Father. If you ever come to Chicago, I'll show you the picture of these prisoners, where they finally got a chance to have a picture taken of them taking a sun bath in the middle of the summer. We went on trial in April, you see, and it lasted till the judge died in November, where they were getting a nice sun bath out in the yard for the prisoners. But that's what when you tell me about that woman, it was a political frame-up. And finally, did you know that they also asked to have that trial called off because it said they're making it a trial of the Jews. Now, for instance, the day that we introduced the genealogy of Roosevelt, every juror had gotten educated to the point where, well, the A&P man said to me, "I think they're making anti-Semites out of these jurors." And they read every word, and it's like then handed it on, and they read every word, you know. And oh boy, the stuff we introduced into that trial. And they got heartily in favor. And you know, the guy who runs, he was on the Federal Reserve Board, and he owned the Washington Post. He was the one that sent his reporter to write to all of us. Now, don't use your common sense if you want to hear about the trial. The idea was that they sent, for instance, I got a letter that they wanted a leaflet. It was a 10-cent leaflet, and I sent it to Washington. Now, by constructive presence, meaning imagination, they used an old bootlegger case that by imagination you could be a place. We all conspired. Now, a lot of these fellows I didn't know at all that were in the sedition trial, but presumably we all conspired together on the same day in the city of Washington. Now, none of us were in Washington on that day, but they held that we were there by constructive presence or imagination. Don't get reasonable now, whatever you do. And then one proof of it was that when my leaflet arrived in Washington, you see, from Chicago, I arrived with the leaflet by imagination, see. You can't beat that, can you? Well, we finally got the whole thing dismissed, but it was the biggest farce in history. And they finally, since it was leading into a regular Jewish revelation course, one man used to come in from Philadelphia. I used to speak quite often in Philadelphia, and he was a lawyer, and he'd come in to lick his chops. He never saw anything done like it in his life, and then nobody ever else will, because it didn't have a semblance of law to it. And when Judge Belitha Laws dismissed it, he said it was a crime that 30 people had been held all that length of time without one piece of evidence being presented by the prosecution against any defendant. Now, what they were intending to do, and I found out later, I get all the American Jewish yearbooks. That's the American Jewish Committee, which are the lords of the world. Believe me, after 30 years of work on this, that they are. And they told how they were having these mob trials all over France, hundreds of thousands in every one of those countries, right straight through Europe. Anybody, well, look what they did with the Patriot. What was the Patriot of France? You know, who was the hero of the World War I? They put him on the island of Europe. Huh? Pétain. Mm-hmm. They had Pétain as a prisoner. When de Gaulle, the great so-and-so, came in, he had 1 million French Christians jailed. I have French friends over there. Everybody I know that writes the way we people do here was in jail there. He had 105,000 killed by giving the names and address over the British Broadcasting Company, where he was there with his flyers that had never flown, the Rothschilds from Britain. Now, I have documentation on this. 105,000 were murdered by giving their name and address and picking you out at night and get them. Then he comes in and liberates France by jailing 1 million French Christians. You see? That is the system. So they had won that system everywhere. And my prayer was, of course I didn't know that then until they wrote it up later, but that the cause of all American liberty wouldn't go down the drain with taking these people as a beginner. Now, as Mr. Stokes said, nobody was safe in this country. If they could have convicted people like me, who have never stood for anything but Christianity and Americanism, and many of the others like Colonel Sanctuary and all, who've been nothing but Bible Christians, if they can convict them, anybody who said anything against that dirty bum Stalin could be sent over the road for endless years, you see. It was a crucial test. And it lasted and lasted till the old judge croaked on the bench. And so then that ended the sedition trial. But it wasn't pleasant to sit there for nearly 8 months, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, and have your children, my daughter going to school in Kenilworth, and have to get home a weekend once in a while to see whether she was getting along all right. I had an old housekeeper, fortunately. But they intended it for all of you. But they've kind of gotten blunted at it, and they don't want people like you that know anything about this subject to get on a witness stand. Is there any question? Well, at least I hope none of you get in one of those things. But I thank God that we had a happy outcome of the whole thing.